If we would implement inquiry more in the classroom, the idea of inquiry science, would that help enhance the science fair experience for the students?
Welcome, everybody, to the Inquiry Zone, and I am John Taylor, Director of the STEM Education here at ETHOS Innovation Center.
And I am Douglas Hunnings. I'm the Director of the Primary STEM Education here at ETHOS Innovation Center.
And this is really like a special episode of what we do in the Inquiry Zone. In fact, we're looking at, this is more than a one-parter. We're looking at least two-parter here as Douglas and I are going to talk about this. So I hope you stick around for both parts. And I'll just say up front, these are in a lot of ways, these are our opinions on things. We're not expecting to say, this is perfect. I do think the topic we're talking about today is something that's definitely a transitional stage as with all the virtual and in-person changes, and just the way inquiry approaches are getting better understood and process skills are rising to the front, higher order thinking. So anyways, what's our question, Douglas?
Well, this is a good one, like you mentioned. And actually, what's really cool about this question, John, is it came from an administrator who was part of our science training.
Very cool.
So the question today deals with the big hot topic in science, science fair. Some people react differently when they hear that phrase. So the question that was brought up today is, if we would implement inquiry more in the classroom, the idea of inquiry science, would that help enhance the science fair experience for the students?
Oh, yeah. I mean, boy. Okay. So what do we want science fair not to be?
One thing we don't want it to be is an added task for not only the students, but for the teachers.
That's a thing. I do think in certain classes, it's worth taking time for the kids to do that. And we're getting a little different perspective because we're going to focus a lot on the elementary. But I was a secondary teacher. And as a secondary teacher, when I first started doing science, student research projects, it was independent. It was on their own time. It's amazing what they can do on their own time. But I really changed my philosophy on things. And as we do this inquiry approach with these teachers, which we'll talk about that, I love the day when my students said to me, do we just do like we do in class? And as our write-up, just like the write-ups we do in class, we can present these, and it's like, yes, we did it right. I know you've had that experience too.
Yes, I was going to say that. I still remember that feeling of once I, in the classroom, was able to implement inquiry on a more regular basis. When we got to the time of the year where we would do a science fair for our building, one of my students was like, whoa, wait, when I do my project, that's just like what we do every day in science. And I was like, yes, you finally caught the point. And then for me as a teacher, I felt I have equipped my students to be more confident and not feel as overwhelmed when it came to do the science fair, because they were starting to see the science fair as just a way to share out what you're learning, because science fair is a way to represent your science discovery in the class. So when my students saw it as not an extra assignment, but rather just something that we naturally do, I was so excited. And I still remember that day when a student told me that. I wanted to jump and scream.
Yes, exactly. We want our students to be able to do science.
Yes.
I remember as a kid trying to build crazy things. Like I remember in elementary school trying to build a robot. I had no idea what I was doing. And same with these science fair. If we say to the kids, hey, you have to do a science fair project this semester and it's do this and do your hypothesis now and do this now. We'll put up this, there's, the 7 steps we go through in our training with teachers. We look at these 7 steps. Each of these is a skill. Each of these has to be taught. Each one has to be developed. And I think year by year by year, we have to keep teaching them, because if we look at, what is observations for a kindergartner is going to look a lot different than observations for a 3rd, 4th grader. Will look a lot different for a 6th grader, as a junior high student and a high school student. Observations at a kindergarten level, they're not going to crack into online research and do highlighting. and pulling out things from all the different texts and contact professors and researchers and all this. They're not going to do all that. It's going to be a much different experience. They're going to look at, look at a butterfly and make observations and start to ask questions. And they're going to start to wonder. It has to look different at the different ages, but these skills, each of these skills annually needs to be taught to our students at each level. And if they're having trouble with doing science fair on their own or doing a science experiment, I think the reality check is they don't know how to do it.
And I'll say that's something that I went through as a new teacher. I viewed science from my own experience in school as just a project, something you do every year to share out. So when I started teaching, I would do my science instruction. I would teach whatever I needed content. But then when science fair came, I actually used it as, okay, kids, here's a packet. I made a packet. It explains the definitions of what is a question? How do you make a hypothesis? And then I sent it home. And then I said, okay, go ahead and do it. And then I gave them due dates. When did they, you have to tell me your hypothesis by this Friday. You have to write your procedures by next Tuesday. And then by the time I went through all the due dates and they finished the packet, I thought, okay, good, you're good. Go do your science fair now. Yeah. And then my students could, tell me what they wrote, but really learning and understanding the whole experience, they struggled. And I struggled as a teacher because I'm like, how can I better help them? It wasn't until my third or fourth year teaching when I started really bringing and embracing inquiry as an instruction rather than a way to teach a certain lesson. I started seeing the ease for my students and for myself.
Right.
I taught them, like you said, I taught the skills as something the students need to think like a scientist. So then when it came to that science fair time, I felt like I wasn't scrambling to get all this information to them. It was just a review, and they started seeing it as just another way to explore like a scientist.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say we're talking to teachers. We're also talking probably to science fair coordinators. As you're coordinating these, our challenge to you is to rethink your science fairs and what your expectations are for the different grades. Douglas has said many times, I love how he says this, that at the younger grades, we're teaching kids how to think like a scientist. Now, when they get to third, fourth grade, we try to flip it around. So now let's think like a scientist to do science. It's that flip flop. So why are we expecting a first grader to perform at a fifth grader? And how many students really are those, wow, we're excited because of one or two students at a science fair? We should be excited by dozens and 100 students that are able to deliver science at appropriate level. Meaning, if a kindergartner or first grader, if they're making observations on what they're seeing, they're questioning what they're seeing, and they're making some predictions, and then they investigate that, I'd call that a win.
Yes, I agree. And that's something that we talk about when we do our trainings with the teachers, especially with the lower level, is focus on those beginning steps, observation, asking questions from those observations. Maybe you want to get to start an idea of a prediction. Though if they become proficient in those skills, that will help get them to the next level. Yes. Now, when you think of science fair, let's say you're a K-1-2 teacher and you really want your students to get that experience because it is valuable for them. Right. Maybe instead of feeling like every one of your students have to do their own project, why don't you do a class science fair project? Now, we're still teaching those skills in other science experiences in your class, but if you want to do a project, have your students help you write out the observations, write out the question. But then when you get to, following procedures, analyzing the data, that's something that can be teacher-led. Students are hearing it, they're being exposed for the whole project.
Right.
But they're not expected to do that independently. Having a group project for a science fair, I think would help them as they get to the higher levels when they have to start doing one independently.
Yeah, and this is something we can definitely talk about a little more. Let's take some time to talk about this, because you find as you get into science, where it gets fun and interesting is in the little details. And I'm going to throw this in the left curve here, a little bit way out in the field, but the idea of science being right and science being wrong, we got to take that off.
Yes.
That if we can prove something verifies or on a hypothesis, all right. If we can disprove our hypothesis, that's all right too. They both help us to learn the part of science. So what I'm saying here is, as a class, if you're going through an experiment, you want to keep an eyeball out for these kids. If you do as a class and this is something you want to present as more of a science fair forum, it'd be great. In fact, I'd even say real quick here, if a whole class shared, and that was part of the science fair, all the first grade class shared some experiment they did together, that'd be an awesome thing to celebrate. But when students are going through these and they ask you a unique question, okay, now you got something. Mm-hmm. You can say to that young lady, young man, say, hey, why don't you check that out? And that becomes their science fair project. So you've done it collectively as a class, and now with your 20 different kids as they're coming up, and some may even have the same little tangents they come off or little points they're very curious about. That's okay, because when kids go to explore more, it turns into a unique process. It turns into something they will not share it out the same. It may happen, but generally there's some nuanced differences between them. And again, it goes back to those fair directors and the judges. What are you looking for from a first and second grader? Are they getting excited about science? Are they having fun? Are they doing the science process at that age? I mean, those are moments to celebrate, not, this kid, the first grader is doing eighth grade work. That's cool, I guess. And then things, but let's not let that happen, because more likely the parent did eighth grade work, right?
Yes, I know that was one struggle that I know that I had. Parents as a teacher would come to me and they were stressed out during this time of the year because they felt like they had to take on more of the role of that teaching. So then me as a teacher, I had to reflect on how can I help better equip my students. So if they are working, and this is 4th and 6th, if they are working on this project at home, the parent doesn't feel as overwhelmed, and feel like we're taking things off their plate too.
Right. Parents should be along for the ride. It's
just a win-win, in my opinion, once the students start feeling more comfortable using these skills every day.
So, and I'm going to throw another one out I know science fair season tends to come really early, and I'd encourage science fairs to be pushed as late as you can push them, because again, if this is a process we have to teach our students, and each classroom's unique, each teacher's unique, you need to go through a few science experiments with your kids before you get to that one that is really, now you're ready to go off on your own and do your thing. Now we're talking about the early grades here, but it's worth doing this multiple times before they're going to feel comfortable with it and absorb it. And then, what's going to happen is then you're going to have a few of the students that go home and they do something completely unique and create opportunities for them to share out as, it's just more of science happening, which is a great thing. We'll kind of throw back. What do you think about, Douglas, though, as we get into, past the 3rd grade, we get into the 4th, 5th, 6th grade? At this point, we'd hope that science is happening K through 2 already, and that in 3rd grade and the teachers on up have this foundation to build off of, which may or may not exist depending on the schools. But what are reasonable expectations for the students at these levels?
Well, when you get to the upper elementary, we again want them to start thinking like a scientist to learn the science content. So those skills, if they have been encouraged and practiced year after year after year, it's a natural idea, just like arithmetic or just, with reading. Those should be skills that the students should be proficient in. So when you get to the idea of a science fair, it should be, again, seen as just something they do every day. And that's where I got to the point where, like I said earlier, where I was excited. My student didn't see it as an added assignment, but rather, oh, that's just what I do in the class. Now I could just do this at home.
Sure.
That's the expectations. They should be able to go do the inquiry process. They should be able to complete an experiment within their investigation on their own. Now, of course, as all students are different, there are different, learning levels with our students. But I still found that by having them practice it over and over again, they felt confident. They felt that they could do that. It wasn't a defeated, like, oh, I can't do this, I'm not able to, but rather I can. And that's where I was okay with if they took an investigation that we did earlier in the year and they just modified it a little bit. They go through the process. I'm all right with that, because the purpose, in my opinion, the purpose of science fair is just a way to share your learning. And I know this is one thing when I first started teaching, I felt if I had 24 students, they needed to have 24 different topics. Right. They could not be similar. They could be related, because if that is not the way it should go. boy, I wish I could go back in the past and just say, stop thinking that way.
Right.
If the students vary, if the topic may be similar, but their actions, their procedures, their outcomes are different, I think that's okay. And that also leads to good discussion and debate from students. How did student A and student B follow the same procedures, similar, but yet they have totally different outcomes? And that's a good conversation to have with each other. And I think that was a benefit of, it's all right if the topics are similar, because there's still going to be different learning outcomes. And that discussion can be brought up, especially in that conclusion, that analysis of it. So for me, a big aha was, I need to stop stressing myself out by making sure I have 24 different projects going on.
Right. And it's essential, like you're saying, but it's at this age, they can go through all 7 steps is what we'd expect them to do as we get into the older grades and going through that. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to stammer here a little bit, because quite often science fair is thought of as an individual project, and we get into team projects or groups that want to work together. And that could be a good discussion in of itself. And I don't want to go in that rabbit hole yet, but we can. But the things is, when you have 2 students working, not as a team, but doing the same experiment at say 5th, 6th grade levels, junior high, high school, and they work independently from the same start, they will naturally move forward. And as what happens is, you can think of like if you do concept mapping with your kids, where you look at how things are related and how you're doing, as you get farther and farther from where you started, that's where we want to move our students as they get older, farther and farther into the little details. So I'll just throw an example of this and how this goes. But the point will be that you want your students to move into these little tangents, because when they disagree and they both sound good, then you got to realize there's a step we're missing. There's a step beyond this in the investigation. And that's where, as a teacher, we're going to be okay with that. Is if they don't agree, then the students need to present their findings, because there's something more going on, and that's not awful. That's okay.
Yeah.
But like example would be like, I'd expect maybe a first and second grader traditionally would tell me what kind of stuff to put on snow to melt it. We're in Indiana, so keep my sidewalk. They'll talk about fertilizer and salt and sugar and stuff like that they've tried and how it worked and all that. When we get into an upper level, you start looking at, all right, so let's not use what if you just focus on salts? What if you color it? Oh, I didn't think about that. What if you crush it up? See, those little things, those 2 are completely different routes on a science investigation. And that's where we want our kids to go, that we want them to look into the details. What if you put the salt down first before it snows? What if you wait till afterwards? Things like this. There are so many things related to that initial idea of what melts snow. And by going farther from that initial question, that guiding question, to a new hypothesis and move our way on out, that's where science gets exciting. And if you're dealing with like junior high and high school students, you got to move them as far away as you can. I mean, that's what scientists do. We work to those, and we get that nailed down. We come back, we nail down another point, and we take on one idea at a time. The general is general. Anyways, I want to throw that out because at the younger grades, it's going to be very general what they're doing. Salt on snow is great. And as they get older, we look at those tangents. But we want to kind of guide our students into, as they get older, into more of the details of what's happening.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
A
lot of good stuff. And I do want to circle back another one next episode. The discussion would be, what about groups? What do you think about team projects and individual projects on science fair? Thank you to our partner schools as they complete the Inquiry Zone baseline training, the amazing dedicated staff at Bristol Elementary, and the outstanding staff at Pinewood Elementary. Thank you all. ETHOS offers the Inquiry Zone professional development to schools. Helping to ensure a robust, fun, and cross-curricular approach to science is supported in all grades. Please contact us at contact@ethosinc.org.